Good evening, dear colleagues. Welcome to another INGED Zoom talk. Today, our guest is Professor Dr. Ayşegül Daloğlu from Middle East Technical University. Ayşegül Hocam is very special for us because she is one of the founding members of INGED, and she has always been a great support of our association. She's always with us, and we appreciate her support and help, definitely. Her interest areas in the academic field are curriculum development, program evaluation, testing and assessment, and teacher education. The title of her talk today is Affordances of Digital Age, Building Resilience in Teaching and Learning and Global Collaboration. Thank you, dear Ayşegül Hocam, for being with us as our guest speaker. It's an honor to have you with us, and welcome again. The screen is all yours.
Thank you, Aydan Hocam. Thank you for your kind words of introduction, and thank you for inviting me here this evening. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be with you this evening. And I welcome everyone. I see very familiar names, some new names, and some former students, colleagues. I welcome you all. It's a real pleasure. I'm honored to see that you're willing to spend some of your Friday evening with me. Thank you. It's also an honor and a pleasure to be here as a speaker for INGED. INGED has a very special place in my heart. I'm one of the founding members of INGED, as dear Aydan Hocam just said. My membership number is 3. And I still remember the days when we started the association, a group of colleagues, and Aydan Hocam has always been in support. And has been carrying it on her shoulders for quite a time. So her input and her efforts are much appreciated. So I'm very happy to be here as a speaker for INGED. Now, this evening, when Aydan Hocam approached me with this suggestion, I thought of a topic. Well, I thought of many things, okay? So, because Aydan Hocam said, you know, you can choose any topic you like, which was a very generous suggestion. I thought about, you know, possible topics, and obviously, the first thing that came to my mind is mid-March is the second year anniversary of our COVID-19. So COVID-19 has been with us for exactly 2 years. So I thought I would start with COVID-19 and what kind of challenges the pandemic imposed on our lives as teachers and also as human beings. But then, what kind of skills and strategies did it equip us with? In other words, how did we become more resilient? Okay, I'm known to be an optimistic person. I'm trying to, well, you know, making an effort to see what we have gained from the challenges of COVID-19. So this evening, well, if you will allow me, I'll share my screen. And as Aydan Hocam said, if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat box, right, Aydan Hocam? And we will try to address them as we go along. Can you see my screen? Okay. Okay, so the topic of my talk this evening is Affordances of Digital Age, Building Resilience in Teaching, Learning, and Global Collaboration. And I want to start with talking about the challenges posed by COVID-19 and how I see education will be in the post-COVID-19 era. So now I cannot confidently say that we have approached post-COVID era, but we probably will. We're still in transition as I see it. So what happened to teacher competencies? What additional competencies did COVID-19 face us with? And how did we become more resilient to fight with those, to address those challenges? I'd like to talk a little bit about flipped learning as a pedagogical approach, which I have found to be very useful and very supportive in this COVID era. And I'd like to talk a little bit about flipped learning as a tool for building teacher resilience and educational resilience, and digital age and global collaboration as one of the affordances of the digital age in the post-COVID era. So that's just a brief outline of the topics I'd like to address this evening. Now, I'd like, I said it's been exactly 2 years since we started the emergency remote teaching. And if you remember, in mid-March 2 years ago, overnight, we started teaching online. Personally, I was one of the lucky people because I was on sabbatical. I was not teaching at that time at ODTÜ, but I was in the United States on sabbatical and came to on one of the last flights, international flights that left the United States. Came to Ankara and I realized all my colleagues started teaching online and the challenges of such an abrupt shift to remote teaching. As I said earlier, I was lucky because I had a little bit of time to prepare and I started teaching the following September. And then we did a full year of online teaching. What were the challenges? I'm sure we had, well, each of us had different challenges, but I'd like to make some generalizations and a brief summary. So these are based on my communications with my colleagues and some review of literature. Okay. I didn't include all of the references, but those are available upon request. But what were the challenges? I think the main challenge, the first challenge, was isolation. Okay, so all of us faced some isolation. Who were we isolated from? From our peers, from our social groups, from family. So there were lengths of time we didn't interact with anyone, meaning our colleagues and our family. That also meant a step towards spending more time with the nuclear family, so our immediate family. Okay? So more time at home with family. And I realized that, my colleagues with younger children, they had a very difficult time because most of them were getting help from their parents and from, support systems such as nurseries or kindergartens, which were closed as well. Okay? So professionals who had to work from home without the support systems that they were familiar with and the support systems that they relied on. So I think that was a major, major challenge. And also online teaching with more emphasis on digital tools. Now, technology is an integral part of everyone's life. And the last 20, 30 years, our life has been integrated with technology. But the abrupt shift required other skills that some of us, or most of us, were not familiar with. And what happened as a result? The result was emotional responses to stress and abrupt changes. So emotional responses caused by stress. Okay? And oops. So what did that mean in terms of digital access? Okay? So digital access meaning we were at home with our families and we had our technological support systems to some extent, but the EU survey that was conducted just last year, not last year, 9 months ago, shows that 67% of the teachers provided distance education for the first time in their lives in spring 2020. So this abrupt introduction of remote education, it was the first time experience of 67% of the teachers. And from the students' perspective, the same EU survey says that 90% of the students in Denmark had access to virtual learning outside the school. It's 70% in Turkey, 60% in Slovakia. So that 70% in Turkey, it is the percentage of access, but it doesn't say anything about the spectrum of access. So to what extent were they able to? And what extent did these students have technology? Doesn't say anything about that. So given this situation, what were the limitations? The limitations, actually I've listed 6 here, but I'm sure there are more, but this is just a summary. The main limitation, I would say, was the tools for online learning and the skills regarding the use of those tools. We often heard of teachers who didn't have laptops of their own. The laptops belonged to the schools and they were sharing them with other teachers. So limited technological tools, that was one domain. And the other one is the use of digital technologies, the skill of using them. Another one was situations in which online learning is not an option. So some students did not have internet access at all. However, at this day and age, we take access to internet as a necessity. We don't see it as a luxury, but still there were households that didn't have internet access, and that was a major situation because there wasn't a solution for it. Okay. The third one, lack of common standards, accessibility, and quality assurance of digital learning content. So those of us who had some materials and some technology to make this shift to remote teaching, we were not sure about the quality, and we were not sure about how to deliver that content. Okay, so we didn't have any standards in mind because it was so abrupt. Okay? Limited focus on socio-emotional well-being. So we're all whole people. Okay, we don't leave our emotions behind when we start teaching. So this abrupt change and many sources of stress led to some limiting the focus on socio-emotional well-being and on safe learning spaces in the digital context. So how do we create those safe learning spaces? That was another question, another issue. Another point was efficient school and community partnerships, school, community, and family partnerships. So especially in schools, well, I'm not referring to universities when I say this, but in schools, parent-teacher communication is of vital importance. And when everything moved online, there was a breakdown in that communication as reported by many parties. And that was a major issue. And later on, when solutions were introduced to these limitations, we realized that it is the teachers and the parents that came up with these solutions, not bureaucracy itself. So actually, these stakeholders were very active in seeking solutions. And another point, another limitation I can mention is digital divide. So not all populations had equal access, but this change was introduced for everyone. So what were the causes of stress? Teacher stress. Now, some studies show that there is a relationship between level of education and the amount of stress teachers experienced. There is a study conducted in the EU that shows that high school teachers experienced higher levels of stress compared with middle school or primary school teachers. Why? Perhaps because students are under more, because they're preparing for high stakes exams and they're preparing for university, and teachers probably feel an ownership and they empathize with the students. Maybe that is one of the reasons, but that was one of the conclusions. Another conclusion was that if teachers taught more than 4 hours a day, they had higher levels of stress. But as teachers, sometimes we teach 6 hours, 8 hours a day. But in online teaching, some studies show that the threshold is 4 hours. If it's online teaching more than 4 hours, it can lead to stress. Well, technological barriers, yes, we talked about technological barriers under limitations anyway. Student motivation. Again, we come to the point of student-teacher interaction. Okay, so actually, education depends on this genuine relationship between the student and the teacher. So student motivation in online teaching was a major cause of teacher stress if students were not motivated. And another conclusion from the study by Klaproth is women had higher levels of stress than men. Are we surprised? I don't know. And they say, well, actually, these researchers, their conclusion is conflict between work and family roles. So all of these roles were intertwined because when we go out to teach, we leave some of the concerns behind at home. And the shift in the atmosphere introduces a new world. But when we started teaching from home, this was a major challenge. Now, what about coping strategies? What did we do as teachers? Research says coping through functional strategies and dysfunctional strategies. So functional strategies, one thing that we did was we accepted the situation, we planned accordingly. And that was one way. Okay. Another way was seeking social and professional support. And we realized that we responded to stress immediately. And one thing that happened that I witnessed in my colleagues and in my friends, we formed social Zoom groups. And we had evenings where we socialized over Zoom. Some of that was purely social. Some of that was professional as well. So most of us, had our little groups of, seeking professional support too. So how do you do such and such? How do you present such and such? How do you deal with such a technological challenge? So we developed functional coping strategies. But we, at the same time, developed some dysfunctional coping strategies too. One is denial. Okay, so some of us, wanted to deny the situation and say, well, this is only for a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we will go back to face-to-face teaching. But we knew it wouldn't happen. We knew it would last at least a couple of months. Okay, giving up. Okay, giving up attempting goals. Okay, so totally giving up. Okay? And research shows that another dysfunctional coping strategy was ineffective use of time. Okay, so being at home and with all the work that piled up, spending 8 hours in front of the TV, or escaping responsibilities and coming up with others. Okay? And research also shows that women had higher use of functional strategies, the same research study that I mentioned before. Okay? So Klaproth's study shows that. Okay? Now, that was the situation, a brief summary of the situation during the COVID era. But what will happen in the post-COVID era? The post-COVID era, there is a quotation from Harari that I would like to share, one of my favorites. Okay? So he says, shifting the focus of education to critical thinking, questioning, adaptability, rather than learning. Okay, so this is from his 21 lessons for the 21st century. Okay? And that actually encourages us to think, what will be the next steps in the post-COVID era? So if you ask me, I think, some changes are temporary. Obviously, we will go back to normal, and we are going back to life as it was before. So we've started face-to-face teaching, but some changes are here to stay. So we cannot return to the world as it was before. And some of the strategies and skills we developed over 2 years, I think, will stay with us. Okay? So the question I would like to pose this evening is, could the move to online learning be the catalyst to create a new, more effective method of education? In other words, what will stay with us? Okay? And as we all acknowledge, center of any educational process is the human relationship. And that human relationship between the student and the teacher forms the backbone of any educational process. Okay? So what we have learned from this period of COVID, what will stay with us? Okay, so that is a point I'd like to focus on a little bit. Now, at this stage, I'd like to take a minute to look at TESOL's 5 domains of teacher competency. Now, what are those 5 domains? Well, TESOL calls them standards, okay? But those 5 domains that teachers' competencies are grouped under are language, culture, instruction, assessment, and professionalism. So I'd like you to take a minute to look at this figure. Can you all read it okay? Okay. Now I'd like you to take a minute to think about where or in which domain most of the changes took place in the COVID era. Just take a minute. Okay, what do you think? Now, teacher competencies under language, culture, assessment, instruction, and professionalism. Which domain do you think was challenged the most? Or maybe I should say the most, more than others. I would say instruction. Why? Because when we moved to remote teaching, our concept of how we teach, how we plan our lessons, how we implement them, and how we use resources to manage those lessons changed overnight. Okay? And I would say, to some extent, assessment. Why? Because we moved to online assessment, something we did not do for classroom-based assessment. Okay? And then the concept of professionalism and teacher competencies in response to these changes actually fluctuated as well. Okay? But what did we do? We came up with new plans to address these challenges, to address the limitations that I just talked about. Okay? Now, how did the teaching profession emerge? It emerged stronger than before. So we struggled, we faced those challenges and limitations, but we became resilient and came up with new challenges and strategies in response to this abrupt change. Okay? So resilience, when I think of the term resilience, I always think of trees. Okay, so if there is a very severe storm, trees bend down. But then when the storm is over, trees are back up again. So I think that is what we faced as teachers. So we had this abrupt change and we were kind of, stressed, maybe uncertain, but we came up with our new strategies. And that is, I think, how resilience develops. Okay? So are we stronger than before? Yes, I think so. But what makes us stronger? We became stronger in these 5 domains. Not all 5 maybe, but in some of those 5 domains. So what is resilience? Here I have two definitions, okay? When we refer to resilience in education, what does it mean? Can you take a minute to read these two definitions? If I asked you to identify the key verbs in these two definitions, what would they be? I will do that for you because, you know, we're not, because if we have a discussion, I think it may, well, maybe we could identify, no, okay, I will give the verbs as I see them: to anticipate, absorb, recover from, adapt, mitigate, and again, recover. Okay, so when we talk about resilience in education, we're talking about the ability of the system or people to recover from shocks and stresses, to reduce chronic vulnerability and facilitate inclusive growth. So what do we refer to when we talk about resilience? We're referring to inclusive growth. Okay, so every shock, every change leads to growth. It may be unanticipated, but that's what happens. And what is the World Bank's approach to educational resilience? It is meaningful and relevant direction, innovative education programs, leading to socio-emotional well-being and protection, and available and equitable financial, material, human resources. So actually, educational resilience is revising all domains of education in response to unexpected changes. So we can talk about curricular resilience, we can talk about teacher resilience, and we talk about student resilience as well. Okay? So when we talk about teacher resilience, three concepts emerge. Okay? Perseverance. Yes, without perseverance, career or professional development would not be possible. Another domain is becoming strong with a plan. And we bounce back with growth. So the way I see it in the post-COVID era, through perseverance, hard work, and endurance, we came up with our own plans and became stronger or more skilled. And then now we're ready to bounce back with growth. Okay, so how did we grow? Okay, so one growth is, I would say, digital or technological growth. Okay, so how to integrate technology into our teaching. Okay? Let's see, what about how did we cope with the changing situations? I would like to give a personal example, a pedagogical approach that I used in my undergraduate courses that I found to be very useful. I'd like to share that with you. And I'm not going to share all of the steps of implementation, but I'd like to talk about the principles of the approach. And the approach is flipped learning. Now, at the beginning of my presentation, I talked about how I faced the COVID era and how I started teaching fully online. But as I said, I was lucky to have some preparation time. Okay? And it was the first time I taught fully online. So I was thinking of what I could do to make my lessons interactive, motivating, and in a way dynamic for my learners so that they become involved in the lesson. So think of this as September 2020, okay, when students, university students, were at home with their families and all teaching was online. Okay? So, okay, I will try to implement flipped learning. What is flipped learning? It is a pedagogical approach. Some scholars call it flipped classroom, but I see it as a pedagogical approach. Yes, you're flipping the classroom, but you're flipping learning, okay? And this quotation that I have on the screen, you move the group learning space to individual learning space. And the resulting group space is transformed into a dynamic, interactive learning environment where the educator guides students. And you encourage learner creativity and encourage the learners to interact with the subject matter. Yeah. So what are the advantages of flipped learning? Okay, so it's interactive, engagement. In a minute, I'll talk about what I mean by creating. One very important strength is digital strategy. It gives students the opportunity to use any device, any device that they like. So they can access their mobile phones or their laptops, but they don't have to be in front of a laptop. Okay, it's meaningful and it encourages the development of 21st century skills. Okay. And one advantage that I saw in flipped learning was that it was interactive and dynamic. So it allows ongoing informal class assessment. So by assessment, I don't mean giving quizzes or giving students scores, but assessment as feedback. So are students making progress? And how are they progressing? And it incorporates project-based learning. Okay? And it actually focuses on the development of 21st century skills. Okay, so the 4 C's that we focus on in education, in any stage of formal education: critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. So I thought it is a wonderful way to integrate those. And also other skills, literacy skills, such as technology literacy, information literacy. So how does it encourage development of critical thinking skills? Okay? Here I'd like to take a minute to refer to Bloom. Okay, Bloom is one of my favorites. My students would know that. I always keep referring to Bloom whenever it's time to talk about critical thinking. Why? Because Bloom, if you remember Bloom's taxonomy, knowledge comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So critical thinking skills, higher order thinking skills. It flipped learning enables activation of higher order thinking skills, mastery learning, so students can move at their own pace, peer interaction, students have to interact with each other, and Teacher is the feedback provider and assessor. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, what makes flipped learning unique or different from any task-based approach or the communicative language teaching approach that we talk about? I will come to that in a minute, okay? So the way I used flipped learning, Anderson and Crothwell's adaptation of Bloom's taxonomy. So comprehension, interaction, and critical thinking skills. Okay? And comprehension, remembering, understanding, interaction, analyzing and applying, and critical thinking skills of evaluating and creation. Okay? Now, I will give two examples of how flipped learning can be used in the classroom. The first example will be a language classroom. Okay, so assume you're teaching English at a university prep school or high school. Okay? Some of the activities take place in class and some of them take place outside class. Okay, so in class, it's giving instructions. So the teacher starts with giving instructions. Okay, students create their outlines. Okay, so there is some guidance in the presence of the teacher. And then in class, students collaborate. Okay, they work with each other. And then they revise, and then they view and give feedback. So this is what happens in the classroom. So if this is happening in the classroom, what's happening outside the classroom? Okay, there's a lot of research. So research, and then discussing, composing, revising, creating. And then all of that input again comes back to the classroom. So it's actually a cycle of input in class and out of class. Okay? Now, what about a cycle of flipped learning in a content lesson? Okay, and that is how I used it, okay, because I used it in my methodology course. Okay? What did I flip? I flipped, oops, what did I do? Oops, okay, we were here. The major change was students did not face the new input in the lesson. They faced it outside the lesson. So how did they do it? They explored, they did their research, and for every lesson, we had some kind of a video, an instructional video. Okay? I videoed myself of a lecture, okay, and that was, an 8 to 12 minute lecture that they watched before the lesson, or shared some videos that are available on YouTube. Okay? So students do the initial work outside the lesson, and they come to class to collaborate, to observe each other, to receive feedback, and then to move on to the next exploration cycle. Okay? So I would say the main change is what happens, delivery of content is actually outside the lesson. So in the conventional content or language lesson, content is presented in class. In the flipped classroom, students gather it outside the classroom. And they create projects and tasks in the classroom. Usually in the conventional classroom, students get the input and then they go out and they work on a task. And that is where the reversal between the spaces takes place. Okay. Now, I'd like to wrap up in 1 or 2 minutes. What were the advantages? Okay, so formative assessment and elements of blended, mobile, and project-based learning. Okay? And there is this flexibility of use your own device. Okay, so you can use your mobile phone, and there's a lot of emphasis on mobile learning now because students are on the go now. They have gone back to campus. They are moving from one class to another. They're going home, they're commuting on the bus, in the subway, whatever. So they can use that time. Okay, so how did that bring me back to the TESOL's 5 domains? Okay, so building resilience through instruction. Okay, so changing an instructional method, introducing a new instructional method to become more familiar with digital technology, digital tools and technology, okay? And to become more competent in terms of, well, competent meaning developing new skills to address the changes. Okay? So how does that bring us to global collaboration? Okay, so I said global collaboration, communication, professional development, and partnerships, they are becoming a part of our everyday life. Why? Because boundaries are not distances. Okay, so we had travel, it was difficult to travel. Now we don't need to. We can use our technological skills to build a whole community. Okay? And that is where collaboration develops. Okay? So ease of communication, no need to travel. Okay? So one example I can give is international conventions. So the TESOL convention, which has usually 6,000 to 8,000, sometimes 9,000 participants. And in the past, it was face-to-face. Now it is blended, okay? So some people can join online and others, if they want to travel, yes, they can. Okay? So it is reducing the cost of accessing professional sessions and professional communications. All of that is becoming possible through use of digital technologies, okay? And professional networks. So there are totally online professional networks now. So the digital age is presenting us opportunities that were unseen to us, and with the newly developed skills and strategies, I think teaching world is moving in a novel direction. Now, I'd like to stop here at this point, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Ayşegül Hocam, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. And I didn't want it to finish. So if you have more to say, please go on. We are ready to listen to you forever.
Thank you.
Ayşegül Hocam, there has been a discussion in the chat box, just because maybe you have missed it. Some participants think that we need to immediately start a new course in ELT departments to embellish the students with the necessary skills to teach online, do flipped learning, whatever. Some say that having an individual course will not be sufficient. It should be integrated in all courses. So what is your personal opinion?
Okay. Thank you for this question. Yes, I think use of technology, use of digital tools needs to be integrated into all courses. Okay? Well, maybe all undergraduate teacher education programs have a course in the use of information communication technologies for educational purposes. But then if we leave that in isolation, if we don't integrate use of technology into our methodology courses or assessment course or curriculum development course, I don't think we would reach the goal that we intend. So what is our goal? When our undergraduate students graduate, when they become teachers, we want them to be fully functioning teachers.
Yes, true.
And how can that happen? If we present our education in that way.
And it is at the same time, I believe, walking the walk and talking the talk.
Yes.
So instructors, professors doing what they talk about doing.
Exactly.
That would be an exact, an excellent model for students. Another question just pops in my mind. Do you think the academic staff have the necessary skills to do that? You can be honest. Or do we need?
I always try to be honest. I
we
think
need some kind of in-service training as university staff?
Yes. Okay. Well, again, I will talk. Okay. So I said, I enjoy learning through videoing myself and putting my lectures on video and starting the lesson with that. I didn't know how to do that. So my university offered a workshop on how to do it, okay, and introduced an app, a software that we could use. And that's how I learned it. Okay. So when I decided, using such approaches, I didn't have any technological equipment in my home to do that. So when you video yourself, you need a ring light and, just minor things that you can buy on Trendyol, but
no commercials, Hocam, no commercials.
No commercials, yes. But that's what I did.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say is we all need training. We all need to update our skills, okay? So in the face of, adversity, we always have to think, okay? Reflect on our own experience and say, now, how can I develop myself if I want to cope with this situation? Yes. And then empathize, okay? Empathize meaning if this is what I'm doing, what are my students experiencing? What are their families experiencing? Okay. So in my online teaching, I had, major internet breakdowns. So in the middle of the lesson, internet just, disappeared. And, what did I do? I had to connect using my phone, whatever. If this is happening to me, what's happening to my students? What are they experiencing?
Yes.
Okay. So it's always, there's a lot of, interaction, a lot of reflection. But to answer your question, I think all of us need to develop certain skills, and teachers may need them from time to time. But I will not advertise, but I can say that one thing I learned during the COVID era was asking Google.
Yes.
So if there is a challenge, just type it and ask.
Yes.
And usually there's an answer because there's somebody out there who has faced that challenge before.
Yeah, definitely. There is a t-shirt, I don't know whether you have seen it. It says, "I don't need Google, my wife knows everything." So you don't need to ask Google, you can also ask your wife. Now, Azra Hocam has a question, but I don't know whether you would like to answer this because it requires some time. She asks if you could explain the differences between hybrid, flipped, and blended learning.
Okay.
That requires some time. So
it requires some time, but what I can say is flipped learning, it doesn't have to be online. It's a wonderful tool for 100% online teaching. Okay, but it can be used where you have, hybrid environments or blended teaching. So flipped is actually reversing the learning space. Okay, so actually what you normally, I wouldn't say normally, I hate that word, but in the conventional classroom, we start with delivery of input. Okay? When you flip, you don't start with delivery of input, but you start with tasks or projects or whatever you want to call it that students work on, and you start with feedback. So that is what I would say about the between flipped.
Yeah. I guess when we talk about flipped learning, we are talking more about, well, it is very similar to project-based learning. So Azra Hocam, if you're interested, please ask Google and you can find lots of articles on that. And it requires some reading, believe me. I have done that myself. But as far as I know, as Ayşegül Hocam has said, hybrid and blended, they both require some kind of face-to-face and online going together. Flipped can be online totally, or I don't know, face-to-face totally. Well, projects are going to be done outside the classroom anyway, so
yeah,
you cannot force your students to sit there and do the project, of course.
Yeah, but in flipped learning, students use many digital tools. Okay?
Yes.
Because they don't want to meet with each other face to face. And, most of the time they can't meet face to face.
Yeah. We have another question here. It's pretty long. I'm just going to ask the second part of it because I don't want to read it all. What would you suggest for teachers to help increase students' resilience as an out-of-class intervention strategy? Well, that's another presentation, I guess.
Wonderful question, though.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
because teacher resilience, okay, the way teacher resilience develops, we can develop student resilience too. Okay, so how? I think the starting point is perseverance. So how can we encourage our students to be creative in developing strategies? Okay, so how does perseverance develop? By developing strategies, testing them, and becoming stronger with what we persistently do. Okay, so we need to encourage our learners to try and keep trying, okay, to persist on the use of skills and strategies. And also, we need to encourage them to learn from their mistakes. And we need to encourage them to grow with their mistakes through their learning. So the only path to growth, I think, is through learning.
Yes.
So we need to encourage them to do that. Okay, so that's, I think, how resilience develops. Okay? And another way is, well, not another, but a support mechanism is the environment. Okay, so if students are working with each other, that's a way to develop resilience. If they're working with a teacher, yes, definitely. Okay, yeah. So it's a way collaboration leads to growth.
Yeah. And of course, Ayşegül here is talking about resilience in terms of education, because what can we do about the negative factors at home? Because we all know that school is in fact sometimes an escape from home. I don't want to talk about those very dark situations, but some of the students unfortunately found themselves in those dark situations because they couldn't leave home, and they lost their motivation altogether. Unfortunately, as teachers, there's not much we can do about that. Maybe just help the student find the right authority to help them, maybe.
And to seek help. Okay, so or knowing where to go to get help, to get support. Sometimes students have a hard time finding their way around. And I think that's what happened to some university students when they ended up spending extended amount of time back home because they had prepared themselves to be on the university campus. I'm talking for ODTÜ students, but I think similar things.
I do agree with you, because I can't imagine a university student not being able to attend all those social events. I'm not talking about the educational facts here. I'm talking about, just having fun, being cool, spending time with your friends, being lazy, picking up girls or boys, so much fun. They lost everything, unfortunately. But I mean, the whole world suffered, so there's not much we can do about that. Merve Hoca asks whether you think online learning can be as efficient as face-to-face learning.
Again, that's an interesting question. Can online replace face-to-face? Okay, so if the question is that, it's very difficult to answer that question because online education opens new windows that do not exist in face-to-face. Okay? So this unlimited, this extensive amount of information that's facing us in the digital world, okay? And all the financial benefits, okay? So if just the example I gave about attending the TESOL convention, now you can just attend it online. You don't have to travel to the United States to do that. So if you think about all of those benefits, I don't know if those replace the human warmth of meeting somebody, forming a human connection. Those are very valuable in education too. But today I wanted to, I talked about, many different things, very different things. So I didn't have enough time to focus on that. But education is, in my understanding, centered around the human relationship between a teacher and a student. Okay? Sometimes you can achieve that online. But sometimes you need to be physically present in the same environment to do that. Okay? So that is why I think it's not easy to answer that question. Online environments, digital environments provide us many opportunities, but then the human interaction is also Very, very important. Okay. And it also depends that this, again, is my personal opinion. The age of the learner and the level of education is very important. In earlier ages, in younger students, in younger learners, socialization carries a lot of importance. I don't want to go back to Vygotsky and talk about social cognitive psychology or whatever, but social interaction is very important in children especially. But it's also important in adults too. So I think, we need to approach it with caution. I don't think we can confidently say that online education can replace face-to-face teaching.
Well, maybe it's not replacing, but can it be as effective as? And Halil Ibrahim Hocam has a very interesting comment here, and I totally agree with this. He says, I'm not sure we can guarantee that face-to-face education is fundamentally more effective than online education and vice versa. I totally agree with this statement. I don't know, what do you think, Ayşegül Hocam?
I totally agree, Halil Ibrahim.
I think it all depends on who the teacher is, what the course is, what kind of a relationship there is between the teacher and the students and among the students. There are so many factors, that makes a course effective, I guess. We're dealing with human beings. There are so many variables that we cannot control.
That is right.
Yeah. Are there any other, by the way, Ayşegül Hocam, there are so many thank yous, a wonderful talk, insightful, thought-provoking presentation, lots of compliments. If you want, I can send you the chat box and you can read all these wonderful compliments yourself.
Thank you.
Because it really, I mean, it was really insightful and inspirational. And it also helped us to recall all the other things that we have thought about, like, how can I do that? Is it possible? Maybe I should do that. So you brought light onto that. Thank you very much for that. My dear colleagues, do you have any other questions? Yes, don't worry. I will definitely send the chat box to Ayşegül Hoca. She will see all your compliments.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Şebnem Hocam says, let's continue for one more hour. I bet Ayşegül Hocam is now counting the minutes. She's tired. She wants to rest.
Every minute has been a pleasure, and it's been very interesting. I enjoyed preparing this talk and delivering it, and thank you for your questions. I think your questions are very insightful, and they encouraged me to think of many different domains. Okay, so thank you.
Well, I think we have yes, I was just going to close the session, but I can see Halil Ibrahim Hocam raising his hand, so it would be rude not to give the mic. Yes, Halil Ibrahim Hocam.
It would not be rude, but I just would like to learn, would like to know what you think. We have this personal privacy data law that actually ties our hands in Zoom sessions, because students can choose to not to turn their microphones and cameras on, and even during the exam. So we need to take their consent first, and then we can do things, at least in the assessment procedures later. So What do you think about like the law and the applications in our like daily instructions, and how does it affect you? I don't know, like I just because we always talk about online learning, and is it ethical to ask students to turn their cameras on even though they don't have like a suitable working environment at home? And like, should we turn our cameras on? So from both sides, I don't know. It's a challenging and ethical question. I don't know what you think.
I think that's a very important question, and thank you for asking that, Halil Ibrahim. I will respond from two different perspectives, okay? I will respond from my perspective, which is I do not ask my students to turn on their cameras if they don't feel comfortable doing so, okay? In my doctoral course or in my graduate courses, all of my students turn on their cameras. I turn mine on, and this is my study. This is where I have been the last 2 years, at least 6 hours a day. I show it to my students, and I show them where I keep my methodology books and things like that. So this is my environment, okay? But if students do not want to share, I respect that. Okay? They don't have to. But then there's this issue of assessment. Okay. Now, in my courses, since I use a project-based approach, I don't give in-class tests. Okay. So I personally did not have to administer an online exam to my students, but it's a major challenge. Okay. Assessment methods. I encourage using alternative assessment methods, okay? And I use those. But then the world is moving in the direction of integrating digital testing into everyday life. Okay, so I'm, somewhat familiar with TOEFL and other, international exams, international language proficiency tests, and they have very sophisticated technological tools like, face recognition, voice recognition, to ensure that the test taker is authentic. Okay, and people who take those tests give consent, because otherwise the test results would not be trustworthy. Okay, so I can see both sides of it. But then, I respect students' privacy and everyone's privacy in that sense. So it's a very difficult topic.
Yeah, it is. Usually I also say, if you feel comfortable, please keep your cameras on. Otherwise, like I did at the beginning of this session, if you don't, then okay, that's fine with us. It's just for us. It is a horrible feeling to be talking to a totally blank screen in front of you, because what we do is interaction. And if there's no one nodding in front of you or smiling or doing something like that, believe me, last year I gave I held a session with a university department, let me say, I'm not going to give any names, and they have their own application. They do not use Zoom or anything else. And you're not allowed to see the students. So I was in front of my laptop talking to myself. And it's like talking to the walls. And they asked me to talk about teaching English to young learners. That is a horrible topic to talk about when there's no one in front of you. Because you show visuals and you say, and this little fish said, you know, that kind of thing. Esma hocam, you know, big blue fish, yeah? So it was horrible. And I said, no, not again. That's it
Not
for
again.
me.
Yeah.
Now, for example, Ayşegül hocam nods, and I see that someone is at least listening to me. At least one person is listening to me.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful feeling. And Esma hocam,
Yeah.
thank you very much for nodding. I keep doing that. I feel
Yeah.
like those dogs. Do you remember those dogs that we used to put at the back of the car and they would nod?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
Ayşegül hocam, you were to say something.
And one thing that I can add to Halil Ibrahim's question is, in my undergraduate courses, since I want to make the lesson interactive and dynamic, I put students in breakout groups. So they communicate with each other, and then, you know, I visit the rooms, and then we come back together and have a whole class discussion. Since they're interacting with each other during the lesson, in the online lesson, there is a higher tendency to turn on the cameras. Okay, so they're not always talking to me, but they're also talking to each other. So there's that. And one other thing that I notice, I don't share this with my students, but I know that they have their own WhatsApp groups. So an internal communication is going on during the lesson anyway.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes, you know, they turn on their cameras or they turn them off or whatever, but then I know each other. But turning the camera on, I think that is a topic that, you know, deserves attention. But respecting privacy, I think, is very important.
Yeah. Gamze hocam has written that at the end of the course, one of her students said, hocam, I now know how you feel when we don't turn on our cameras in the lessons, and that has made my day. Yes, Gamze hocam, revenge. Ayşegül hocam, I don't know how to thank you, really. I mean, thanks a million, a zillion, I don't know. I hope to see you with us again sometime soon. Thank you, my dear colleagues, for being with us. And Ayşegül hocam, would you like to say farewell, and then we will just close the session?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank dear Aydan hocam for inviting me. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And I thank you for spending your Friday evening listening to this talk. And thank you for your questions. It's always wonderful to see you, and it's always wonderful to interact with you. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. As you know, we love you, and we hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.